Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and to talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Krall, and today I want to talk with you about some of the issues with education in society, or the lack thereof. See, I was privileged enough to be able to grow up in two different suburban towns, each with the best schools in the area. These schools actually let you choose electives in high school, so I was able to take special classes in arts and skilled trades, social studies, sciences, and philosophy. For instance, I took a introduction to psychology class that was really college level, and then there was a college level sociology class that was actually taught by a local college professor, who actually is the one who got me interested in studying sociology and social sciences and culture and such, and actually taught me how to do so the same way she taught college students at the college she taught at. I was getting to learn this in high school, and that's where I first learned how to actually study social sciences on my own and do fieldwork and research and compile data and formulate a theory or thesis and do studies on my own and stuff like that. So I had really good teachers teaching really good classes that obviously they were passionate about, and a lot of these classes were classes that I chose to take, especially later on in high school. So they were things that I was passionate about learning, and the learning experience thus was a very good one. And our schools and towns had great libraries as well that I could look up great books on things that my teachers wouldn't teach me, right? So I got an interest in physics when I was only able to take like a chemistry class, right? Because physics was something you had to wait until you were in like 12th grade to learn. So I just would go to the library and learn about it there, all right? I did this all of the time with all sorts of subjects that I couldn't learn from my teachers. And in these schools, I grew accustomed to people being able to have intelligent, intellectual conversations and debates. And it was a really great educational experience, okay? But unfortunately, these schools, even though they gave me such a great education, they still did not prepare me for the real world. They didn't teach me much of the job skills or even the job hunting skills that I needed. Those I had to learn from my parents. The sex education that I received in my school health class was poor and really, didn't give me a healthy mentality about sexuality, which was ironic because it was being taught in health class. And yet all you're really being taught is how to have a fear complex and anxieties and paranoia about STDs, right? When I wanted to actually learn how to have a healthy sexual mindset and healthy sex life, that I had to do from books and internet research and practice. And school didn't teach me anywhere near as much as I needed to know about the government in order to be a functioning citizen of this country. In fact, it didn't even teach me how to do my fucking taxes. And it certainly didn't prepare me for the real world in just about any way. And I would soon find out that being in high school was like living in a bubble. It was like living in a small tribe where everyone knew everyone. We learn to function in this social matrix and be successful in it, but it is not even a microcosm of the world. In fact, it's really not like the real world at all. Nothing in high school is representative of the real world, in spite of the fact that often when I would ask teachers things such as, why are we being taught this? Why do we need to know this? They would say, well, you're being taught this to prepare you for college, which is, something you go to prepare you for living in the world and having a job. So I heard that a lot, and yet that didn't actually end up being the case. And my education, as good as it was, didn't prepare me for the fact that most people in the world are much less learned and intelligent. That most people apparently read at a third grade level. And in order to be a popular author, you need to actually write less intelligently than you want to. It didn't prepare me for the fact that most people cannot have an intellectual conversation or debate. All they can do is argue about what most of the time are just unfounded opinions. In fact, most people can hardly put together a proper sentence these days, or listen to someone else who's trying to educate them on something that they know more about. And the stupidity of the masses is getting worse and worse as time goes on. Those schools I mentioned going to, well, that was back in the 90s. 20 years later, I find out from my son that is, now in middle school, that the school doesn't even grade on a scale of 1 to 100 anymore. That it doesn't give out letter grades or even fail people. So it's almost like the schools today are intentionally creating a retarded populace. It is certainly producing people who are not properly educated or having their minds developed enough. People who can hardly read or write, which are supposed to be the two fundamental things school teaches children, and who, once they've gotten out of school, will never read another book or do any research ever again, who will formulate opinions that are thoughtless or based on being told what to think by authority figures. And this is actually done by design. You see, the education system is a form of what is called social engineering. And it is not engineered to produce intellectual individuals. It is engineered to produce mindless worker bees. You see, as someone who still loved to do research even after I completed school, but who didn't have what it took to go to college, I continue to educate myself, and do my own research as I always had done anyway. And eventually I discovered lectures from a former member of government who talked about the education system and the way that it was socially engineered for the purpose of creating this army of corporate drones. So apparently, even though my schools, had their flaws and limitations, they didn't teach me how to do taxes and all that stuff. Well, at least they produced someone who is an intellectual, who not only learned from his education, but learned about how to learn and how to continue educating himself, and to continue reading and such. And so it's been really difficult for me to consider what the education must have been like for some of these people who can't hardly read or write, people who go to schools, on the other end of the spectrum, like in the ghetto, or have teachers who just don't care, which some of them don't, or are in school districts that don't get hardly any funding from tax dollars in their area, since it does go district by district based upon each district's budget. So I know that there's a lot of very poor schools out there that, these are schools that basically are producing these armies of unintelligent, unconscious, drone-like people, who, they're like NPCs. They talk in scripts. They can't really think for themselves. They've got no real intellect, no real psychological development, and no real knowledge. They just find a menial job that they can do. And that's really where I think most of the tax dollars comes from, is this populace of these sort of unconscious drones in society, which are produced by poor education primarily, because that is what our education system is meant to do. It has been socially engineered to create armies of worker bees. That is why most schools that don't get the funding of the schools that I went to in the suburbs can't offer all of these different electives, where I was able to take classes in different types of arts, where I was able to take a world religion class and a philosophy class and a psychology class and a sociology class. Oh, and the athletics programs at my school were great. And I was able to become a young bodybuilder because my school had a gym, right? And my town had a community gym near my house as well. I lived in a community with other resources, in addition to like the libraries and such. And both our schools and our community centers also had pools. So I was able to take swim lessons and go swimming all the time from a young age. And, it's crazy, even though I live on a lake, along with all of the people in all of the towns and this big city that is on it, whenever I'm there, most of the people there don't know how to swim, right? Because they grew up in communities that don't have these types of resources, right? But what every school does have is the core curriculum of, the liberal arts they teach you: reading, writing, arithmetic, and then the history lessons that the government wants you to know, which are really just government propaganda. And so what they are basically doing is giving the brain the bare minimum that it needs in training to be a, citizen, a civilian in that country and culture, and to have the basic abilities that you will need for just about any menial job. You will have the ability to work a calculator at least, or some math skills if you want to become an accountant or do anything else with numbers. You'll have the basic reading and writing skills you need for just about any job, and you'll be taught a little bit of science as well in order to know whatever you need if you want to go on that kind of career path, right? But these are just the basics that are needed, again, to create a corporate drone. All right, this education system has been socially engineered in such a way so that it will produce a mentally underdeveloped population that is given the basic job skills they need to produce tax revenue, and other than that won't be any more educated, because that would make them less easy to control, right? The more intellectually developed people are, the more independent they are, and more likely to resist authority and rebel. So that is why they've socially engineered our education systems for this sort of social conditioning purpose. This is done because a mentally underdeveloped population is easy to control. People who can hardly formulate sentences are sure as hell not going to be formulating their own independent ideas and ideals, because they can't think for themselves. They were never taught to. They were only taught how to memorize lines and recite them. All authority figures have to do then is to recite lines of social narrative, and the masses will repeat it back as their own personal mantras. So this is why it's so important for us to take our own initiative and educate ourselves and develop our minds and do our own research, because what we are fed in the education system is just government cheese, meant to give us the bare minimum we need to survive without really nurturing us, just as government cheese does when there is a famine. And what the government education system is an intellectual famine, okay? And the education system is, of course, mostly made up of females, and thus is highly feminist, especially in this day and age. So most men are influenced and informed by mostly women. Women are the ones who are in charge of developing the male mind. So not only is the very feminine education system not intellectually developing us men, it actually emasculates us. Women are, of course, biased against men and have their own group preference. So women these days have taken over universities and are now getting degrees more than men are. And you simply cannot expect to get the same education as a man from women as a woman will from other women. In fact, as a man, you shouldn't be learning anything from women, even your mother. Because any teaching that women do to men will not have the positive influence on them that teaching is supposed to. Women's influence on men is negative because not only are they biased against us and don't want us to succeed because they feel it threatens them, but they are completely unaware of what it is like to have to live as a man in the world and how much harder it is for us and how much more strength we need to have than them. So women cannot prepare men for the world because the world provides for women and makes life easier for them than it does for men. These female teachers who are emasculating men, teaching them to be more feminine, teaching them to be more open with their feelings and express their emotions, especially negative ones, or sadness, ones that other people would see as weakness, vulnerability, or worse. These teachers are doing boys a great disservice because they're only taking into account how the world reacts to them as a female when they do such things. They're not considering how a man who does these things will get treated by others. And of course, how do us men get treated when we express negative feelings or feelings that make us seem vulnerable and weak, such as sadness? Well, other people act like they're lions and we're a wounded gazelle, And women don't take this into consideration because they can't see things outside of their own point of view. All right. Another reason why women shouldn't be teaching men is because women are just not as smart as men are. And any man who thinks that they are smarter is obviously retarded. So learning from a woman as a man will always be limiting, okay? Women have a lower potential than men do. For instance, if you look at the things that women, were traditionally known to be good at, whenever men do them, they excel far beyond how well the women can do in them. For millennia, women had a monopoly on cooking, but yet all of the most famous chefs and culinary artists have been men. When I want to learn how to cook something, I first look to famous chefs like Gordon Ramsay or Jamie Oliver or some other world famous man. So you see, learning from women as a man is just limiting in a number of ways. It is like putting a low ceiling over your success. And this is why even students who graduate from universities these days are incredibly stupid and don't even know the most basic things about the world, right? Because the universities, like my high school, are a bubble. But not only that, they are a feminist bubble. And they are focused more on feminist indoctrination and emasculating men than on actually educating people. And they certainly do not want to be producing very strong, independent, knowledgeable, successful men. So if men these days want to actually develop their mind and become intelligent enough to not be just another slave to this matriarchal society, like a robot cog in the system, you need to not only take your education into your own hands and start doing more research on your own, but you need to make sure to avoid learning from or even being influenced by women. I sometimes look back upon when women were trying to educate me and they couldn't do it well enough due to their own psychological limitations. Like when my mother was trying to teach me about, the birds and the bees when I was young, and when she tried to influence, and inform my young dating practices by somehow giving me the opposite of what is good advice, advice that works and is, actually applicable to real life. Or all of the female dating coaches out there I hear doing the same thing with men. Or like teachers I had in school who, for instance, sometimes were Christians and would struggle to be professional with me and do their jobs once they found out I was an atheist. Think about the time I've spent in the dating and relationship and sex ed industry and seeing all of the female professionals in it and how terrible their advice is for both men and women, but especially for men. It's so much worse than the advice they give to women, who they can at least relate to, right? But the advice they're giving to men is not based upon knowing what's actually good for men and being able to relate to them. It's simply idealistic. It's based on ideology, right? All of the advice that women give men is always idealistic instead of practical. And they'll often talk as if they live in a bubble in an ivory tower. An ivory tower that they have never left. And it's almost as if they're not trying to actually give advice for people who live in a real world. And a lot of times these female dating coaches, they teach men these things as if they're supposed to work with women, but anyone who has dated at all knows that it doesn't. It's as if their audience is entirely made up of virgins, or guys who just literally don't know women at all, have barely ever interacted with them in any kind of romantic or meaningful or even flirtatious way. It was like a fish giving advice to a fisherman on how he could catch a fish, which was purposely done just to sabotage the fisherman so that the fish and its friends could get away. All right, like all these women who are giving out dating advice and sex advice and relationship advice to men, especially when they're doing it for money, and it seems to me as an expert in the field that the advice is almost entirely, or maybe even 100% erroneous, right? It seems like they are probably targeting men who just don't know any better because they have no experience. They might even be virgins, right? Or they are perhaps already brainwashed into this sort of ideology, like by their mothers, and these men are simps who are like mama's boys. And it also seems to me that, since the advice they're giving is advice that is unrealistic and doesn't work, and it got me thinking about how female dating advice could actually be the cause of portions, perhaps large portions of the incel community. Men who are upset at women because they can't get laid may often blame it on having followed the advice of women and it not working. So of course, who would they be mad at for that? Women, right? And maybe it comes from their mother and they don't want to be mad at their mother. So, it just sort of goes on to women in general. Right? But we know that women do not teach men the same way that other men do, because they're not teaching you from a man's perspective, right? So they're often teaching you to be more feminine, do things in a more feminine way, which just simply doesn't work for a man. And when it comes to the manner in which women teach or even write books, I've noticed, is that they tend to favor using language in rhetoric and poetry and even speaking abstractly in feelings rather than focusing on practicality, logic, and facts. Often when I'm reading a book by a woman, I find myself not knowing exactly what she means by what she says, feeling as though she herself may not either. And oftentimes I find myself questioning if what she's saying is really true. When listening to a woman speak, I'll question their rhetoric, only to quickly realize that they in fact do not really know what they are talking about. It's as if, again, they haven't done any research at all, but are just spouting off unfounded opinions based on nothing but feelings and narcissism. So as a man, you have to realize that women use words and language differently. They use them to paint pictures of and describe reality in the way that they think of it and, want to imagine it. Okay, so they will often talk poetically and rhetorically. And when a woman teaches, she's going to be talking too much in feelings and not enough in facts. And when she's teaching a man, you have to realize again, she does not understand what it's like for you to be a man. She is not taking your perspective and your reality into consideration. And she has her own group preference, so she doesn't really have your best interest in mind. And you have to realize that women, especially feminists, do not want men to succeed, okay? Especially with women. Women detest hearing about men who, are more successful than they are because it threatens their own sense of success and self-esteem. And women do not like to hear about men who are succeeding with women and doing really well with them, okay? Because women don't want men going out there fucking all kinds of hot, young, fertile bitches. They want him to get on their fucking leash. And the only reason that women teach and give advice and such is not for the students. It's for them. It's so they can feel knowledgeable, important, like the information they have matters, right? They have value to offer others that gives them some sense of self-worth. And so they can have power over others and to influence them and create change in their community, okay? That is why they speak so much in rhetoric. They use words to try to shape reality into what they want it to be, not to describe how it actually is. And that's why they try to turn everything into some sort of socio-political issue that they can change people's opinions on, because they always have some sort of hidden agenda behind everything that they say. So you should not allow yourself to be educated by women as a man. You should be careful of even listening to them at all, in fact. If you are going to get properly educated on a subject, you need to find the right sources to learn from. That is the first and foremost, most important key to research. Start it by trying to find the right sources. And what you realize when you have looked at all sorts of different sources and teachers of different things and taken a lot of classes and read a lot of books and such is that you can only get as educated as your teacher is. So you need to be finding the best people to learn from. And women do not like to research and educate themselves about things unless it's to prove a point or confirm their own biases, which is called confirmation bias. If you don't know what this is, you should look it up and start doing some of your own research right now, because that is a very important thing to know about. But moving on, as I said, if you're going to become well-educated, you need well-educated teachers to learn from. You need to be reading not just any books on the subjects you want to learn, but well-written ones by well-educated authors. If you're going to learn the right information, the truth about a topic, you need to be learning from well-educated speakers who don't just speak in idealistic, poetic rhetoric like politicians, that are meant to reinforce social narratives and, just get them accepted by as many other people as possible, or sell as many books or programs or whatever as possible. Speakers who speak the truth, even when it is unpopular, and who will speak against the social narrative when it is not correct, or not in the best interest of the people, as it often is not. Someone who is teaching in order to educate others, not just make themselves feel big and powerful, and fulfill their need for narcissistic validation. Someone who doesn't have a hidden agenda or a bias that would limit you. Now, some of you out there may be resistant to what I'm saying because it is biased against women. But of course, I have to be biased against women if they have their own group preference and are biased against us, and their influence on us is negative. And I want to have a positive influence on you men out there. I am here to do right by you, not by women who do not have the best interest of us in mind. And even women who mean well don't really give us good advice and end up being a negative influence, okay? Like even our moms. Did your mother prepare you for dating other women well enough that you found success with them? Because mine sure didn't. Mine didn't even teach me how to cook very well, or to find a good job, or have really any adult life skills, or be prepared for the real world. In fact, have you had any female out there teach you how to succeed with women in dating? Did any dating advice you received from women ever work for you and get you laid or into a good relationship with a good girl? Of course not. I can make that assumption because I know for a fact from being in that industry that it just doesn't happen. And how many times have you had women try to give you advice or instructions or tell you what you ought to think or do in a way that was constructive or helpful? How many women out there have been seriously influential to you in a positive way and helped you to succeed? If I'm wrong and there are women out there who are helping you men become experts and successes in your field, then I'd certainly love to know about it. But in my experience, all the experts in the world who are helping men to succeed are other men. And I've literally sought out female teachers and authors to learn from quite a lot in my life, even dipped into female spiritual studies for a couple of years. And as I've mentioned before, I was also a sex educator and dealt with the female side of sex ed. And I found that there is a serious difference in the female versus male academics out there. And at some point, if you're not getting good information from one of your sources, you have to cut it loose and stop using it as one of your sources. You see, one of the keys to good education that most people obviously don't understand is that it's important to be able to sort out good information from the bad. And that is not just correct information from disinformation or misinformation, but also useful information from information that is not useful, because it's either not practical or realistic or is superfluous or for whatever reason just doesn't work. And that is something that is lost due to feminism, because women love to talk about theoreticals and ideals. So when you're doing research, you shouldn't let yourself get bogged down with too much information and taken on so many different irrelevant tangents. You need to be able to hone in on the information that is most specifically accurate and prioritize what is most pertinent and practically useful to you personally or professionally. Not only do you need to choose the right teachers to learn from, but you need to choose the right books and articles to spend your time reading, and the right lectures and seminars and classes to listen to. And these are two things that most people are not doing these days: reading and listening to audio lessons. Now, notice how I didn't mention going to college. You see, the time I spent in the education system was enough for me to not want to attend university, and I'm glad I didn't. Or I may have been sitting here teaching you feminism instead of masculinism. Oh man, could you imagine? But you can probably tell by the way I use language, how I construct my sentences, how I not only use good rhetoric, but also speak in logic and facts as well, that my lack of college education hasn't rendered me ignorant and stupid. Because luckily for us, in this day and age, we are not lacking in information and educational resources. Not only do we still have libraries, you know what those are, right? I've been there recently. But now we have a complete, omniscient, digital, international library online. So getting information has never been easier. So when I was younger, if I heard a word I didn't know in a movie or TV show or read it in a book, I'd have to go look it up in a dictionary. And if I couldn't find the definition there, I had to go to the library. Or in later years, I might go online via the dial-up connection. These days, all you have to do is get out your phone, hit that little microphone button next to the search bar, and say, define this word. And it will tell you the definition. And if it is a larger concept, it will provide a little blurb to summarize it, and maybe some quick resources. Now, I'm assuming all of you know this about your phones already, right? I didn't need to tell you that. You know you can do that with them, right? Okay, now how often do you do that with them? Because as far as I know, I'm the only one who does that. I'm literally the only person I know who uses his phone to do research and get information and define words I don't know and increase my vocabulary, right? And it almost seems like even though information is more readily available and people have the ability to learn easier than ever before, that it's actually having an inverse effect on people, and people are just getting stupider because they aren't doing it for that, but are only using it for entertainment and instant gratification. Now, another thing is that back in the day, if I wanted to learn about something in depth, I had to read a book on it or maybe an article on the internet in later years, but it was usually books. It was rare that I would find a documentary on it or a speaker to listen to. But these days, the internet is full of videos, audiobooks, classes, seminars, podcasts, and other kinds of lectures and talks. In fact, you can get fully educated on many subjects without having to read a book or pay for classes, right, or even DVDs, much less sign up for a university program. And it would surprise you to know that most of the education that I've given myself through the internet over the past 20 years was done for free. I have taken paid courses, yes, but literally, about at least 95% of it has been for free. And there's even paid courses you can find online for free too. Even top universities such as Yale, Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, and all the ones that end in Ford have uploaded some of their courses for free as well. And then, of course, you have YouTube and the other platforms with an infinite number of free videos, many of which are documentaries, classes, seminars, and other kinds of informational talks and videos. And then there's audiobooks and podcasts, of course, as well. And you see, what I've done to become so educated and knowledgeable that I can speak on subjects in spite of not having gone to school for them is that whenever I can be, I'm listening to some sort of lecture. That is how I've intaken so much information into my brain. It's not because I'm an avid reader and have collected a library of mostly used books, and I actually have a whole other shelf of them across the room, right? And I'm not a stranger to libraries either. I do go to my local libraries regularly just to browse and read. But I am actually a slow reader. So while I do love to read and do it often, like almost every day, it's actually not the primary source of my information anymore. It hasn't been for over a decade. For almost every day over the last decade, I have been listening to at least a couple hours or more of good educational information. And I've also been doing it while doing other things. Cooking, cleaning, being in transit, etc. Whenever I'm doing anything where I can have audio playing, I'm listening to something and learning. And that is why, even though I'm an author and I've written 10 books, I've put out exponentially more information via audio and video sources so that people can do the same. So if you don't like to read or don't have time for it because it is time consuming, I get that. But with the availability of information on the internet these days, there's no excuse for being ignorant and stupid, especially to the degree where you can't even formulate ideas of your own or proper sentences to express them with. There's just no excuse for that. There's no justifying it. The problem is that though the internet and cell phones have made information more widely available than ever before, people are still using this technology almost exclusively for entertainment. So you won't bother clicking the microphone button on your phone to ask it to define a simple word for you. But you are fine with spending hours each day absorbed in scrolling through feeds, putting your brain on blast, and letting this technology rewire your brain to make you squirrel-brained. Somehow, this technology that can educate and enlighten us all and make us all experts in anything we want to know is doing the opposite. It's making people retarded. And like feminist universities, it's turning men into women. Because again, this is a playing field that the female brain thrives upon. So women have really taken control of so many aspects of the internet, especially social media and the other social platforms, because women's social centers in their brain are more active than men's, and women are wired for social manipulation for their success. And it is so important for us men to be aware of all of this, all right? We need to know where the sources of our influence are and what the positive versus negative influences are, and to sort the bad out from the good, just as we need to be doing with our information. So again, take your education into your own hands. Stop letting women inform and influence you. Stop using your phones only for entertainment and numbing your mind. Stop being aversive to research and learning because it isn't cool to be ignorant and stupid. And learning is actually really interesting and exciting if you choose topics you're passionate about. And don't let all the free, easy, accessible sources of information continue to go to waste out there, as well as all the time you have during the day in which you can be listening to audio talks, especially if you don't want to read. Because I guarantee you that no matter who you are, how busy you are, there's at least a good hour or maybe 2 each day that you could be listening to and learning things while doing other stuff. But lastly, stop acting like you're allergic to reading, okay? It's just plain stupid, all right? There's so many awesome books out there on so many different topics. You just have to find the right ones, because once you stop reading, it's all downhill from there. For instance, my landlord is 67 years old, and he recently couldn't hold his own in a dispute on the lease with me because he literally can't read it. his own lease. He was literally bumbling trying to read a sentence from the lease that disproved something he had just said to me. Now, it was written decades ago, and he probably, hasn't read it in decades, but the thing is that this is what happens with people who never read after they get out of school, okay? You lose the abilities that you don't use, right? And so these people turn into bumbling idiots. And that's what's happening to everyone because no one really reads anymore. And then there's something you need to read. And if you are in a professional setting with other people, you will then be demonstrating illiteracy, which is just one of the worst things to demonstrate in a professional setting. It just makes you look completely unprofessional and retarded, quite frankly. So resist retardation. Get education. And make sure you're in control of your own mind's development and your personal development because no one else is going to do it for you, especially women who you should be careful about listening to at all because they are generally not sources of good information or positive influence on the male mind. That concludes this video. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If you like what you heard, please click the like button. And if you feel you gained some value from this video and would like to give some back, please do so with the PayPal link below because your support helps fund me doing this work and fight the good fight for men like you. If you are ready to take the red pill and wake up from the matrix and the matriarchy controlling it and learn everything you need to know about female on male sexism, get your copy of my newly released book called Misandry Exposed. On sale now for a special price that won't last long. So check it out by clicking the link below. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.